My parents and I were driving very early on a rural road on our way to a winery. As it was still very early, the sun had not yet risen, and we were driving with the same high beams on, and would occasionally switch to low beams when a random truck would drive by. To explain the situation, I mentioned that my father was driving. I was in the passenger seat and my mom was in the back seat, but was still looking at the road as we were having a conversation and admiring the scenery. The conversation stilled when, without blinking, and apparently my parents too, saw a man walking right in the middle of the road. I didn't just blink and he didn't just come into the light from obscurity. The man materialized himself in the middle of the road and was looking right at us. This couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds, but in my mind it took hours. I thought he would see us driving and just swerve or stop coming closer to where we were about to drive through. But he didn't. And we didn't stop driving. We drove right through him, and he disappeared a millimeter away from the car just as weird as he appeared. It wasn't an illusion. I saw him very clearly, and he looked like a regular man, not see-through and not scary at all. Nobody in the car said anything, and I was too on the edge to talk as I thought I was going insane. My dad stopped at the nearest gas station, got out of the car, and started checking it, but the car presented no signs of crashing into anything. We hit a very big rabbit once, and I'm sure a man would have done much more damage than that. My mom and I also got out at this point. It was obvious to me that he was checking to see if we ran over anything. So I asked, "Dad, did you see him too?" I think he was relieved that he was not imagining things, but also scared that we all saw what we thought was a person. He said he did, and that we should not talk about it anymore. My mom just gave me this look that meant that we'll talk about it later. As soon as it was just the two of us, I couldn't help but ask what happened. Why Dad did not want to talk about it and why he continued driving when there was something that we thought was a man in the middle of the road. She told me that it had happened before and that they almost crashed, but when they turned to look, what made my dad almost crash was that when they looked back, nobody was there. My dad is very superstitious. He is Russian, and he said those are evil spirits that you shouldn't talk about because they feed off of that. I'm writing this because it happened 3 months ago and I still can't understand what happened. My boyfriend doesn't believe in the paranormal and was trying to look on the internet for something that would provide him with a logical explanation, and this is how we stumbled on this subreddit. I just want to know if anybody else has had something similar happen to them. I've never been able to make sense of it, and I rarely tell people this story because I don't want to come across as a loon. When I was 9, my family and I visited friends who live in the English countryside. The neighboring farm had a sheep pasture that I felt very fascinated by and drawn to. We always had lunch at 1 p.m. It was precisely 1 p.m. when I decided to ignore lunch and venture off to the sheep, unattended and without permission. I climbed the fence to get closer to them. Some of them were gazing, but a few of them were sleeping in a half-circle looking formation. I wanted to take a nap with them, so I walked into that half-circle and sat down and leaned against one of the sheep. I closed my eyes for a moment, but when I opened my eyes again, I could no longer see our house, which was visible from miles away. The sheep were still asleep when I started to walk away. In search for the house, there was a small gate that I hadn't seen before that led to another pasture. A little white dog ran past me and I started running after it. It stopped in front of a small horse pen which contained a single white horse. So I crawled into the pen and I pet its muzzle for a little while. I decided to crawl back out of the pen to keep looking for the house, but it was still nowhere to be seen, as if it had never existed. Eventually I reached a small gravel road at the edge of a small forest. It looked like a dead end. There was an old Volkswagen parked there and an elderly woman with white hair and a blue dress suit standing next to it, alone. I ran up to her to ask her for help, but I couldn't say anything. She crouched down and took my hand and gently turned me around. Then she pointed to our house, clearly visible in the distance. I ran home as fast as I could, my eyes peeled on the house, certain that hours had passed and that my parents would be angry and worried sick about me. But when I came back and knocked on the door, nobody was at the least bit surprised to see me, but kind of annoyed that my clothes were torn and muddy. It was still 1 p.m. Literally no time had passed at all. I have never understood how this happened. It wasn't daylight savings time and the clocks in the house, including my wristwatch, showed the same time. I never told anybody what happened until my early 30s, when I decided to tell my dad about it. He replied that the owner of the house, who passed away years ago, had mentioned that unexplained things happen in the area. This is really strange, but here goes. I had some extra money and have recently been buying records. I'm a fan of the Rolling Stones, and there is a little marketplace that is set up every weekend where little locals just sell random stuff. And sometimes you may find somebody selling their old records, so I decided to try and see if anybody had any Rolling Stones records that I could buy. So I went and found an old guy selling records, and I was looking through them, and they were all classical, so I nearly gave up when I looked at the last one in the pile. It was apparently a Brian Jones album. Not the Stones, just Brian. I'd never known he did solo stuff, so I bought it in disbelief and went home. I remember the sleeve of the record. There was no album name on it. It only said Brian Jones, and the picture was just Brian waving at the camera. Anyways, to cut the story short, I played it, and then I put it on the counter and went to bed because it was late, and when I woke up, it was gone. It was gone from where I had put it, and I can't find it anymore. It's not online, it's not on any website, and according to what I've read, he's never made any solo stuff. Another strange thing is that I cannot remember what the record sounded like, except for the fact that I remember it gave me really weird vibes. One night recently, my 1.5-year-old son would not go to bed. So my fiancé and I decided that it would be easier for everybody if he just slept with us in our bed. When I went to bed, it was just my son, my fiancé, and I. My lab was also in the room, but we had no guests or anybody else in the house, and my door is always locked at night. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I didn't check the time, I woke up to what sounded like running 2 clearly different sounding footsteps in my living room, down the hall into my son's room. I jumped up because I thought my son woke up and was playing around in the house. I looked up in the bed for him, and I couldn't find him. I was sure that he was awake and up. Before I go to my bedroom door to investigate, the running sounded like it was on the roof, not inside of my home. I was still convinced that this was my ambitious mini-me running around, so I proceeded to go get him to put him back in bed. I opened the door and went through the house, and the running stopped when I came through my bedroom door to the hallway. I looked through every room, bathroom, and hallway, and I couldn't find him. I couldn't find Alex. I was afraid he went out the back door. Panic-stricken, I rushed out the back door calling his name. He wasn't there either. I ran back inside the house into my room with my heart pounding the whole way. I burst through the door and turned on the lights, and ripped the blankets off the bed, and there was, fast asleep next to me, my son. Relieved, I turned off the lights, relocked the doors, and went to my room to go back to sleep. Then it hit me. As I closed my bedroom door, I heard the running again, and it went over my head, so I knew that it was on the roof. I climbed back into bed and went back to sleep. After that, I just didn't want any more trouble, as, believe it or not, I was used to being visited by the unexplained. I was just glad that it was not my son getting in trouble, and because he was safe next to me, I just blew it off. Every time I try to tell anybody what happened that night, my words fall on deaf ears. I know my house isn't haunted, so I have no idea what it could have been. It's kind of a cold, dizzy feeling, and it's hard to explain, like somebody's watching you or pressing up against you when you walk. One evening, September of 1995, while waiting for my husband to come home after running a few small errands, I dozed off on the sofa, wearing little more than a t-shirt and some bottoms. I woke up to a very strange sensation of something shaking me, trying to wake me up. The physical shake was very real, but my son was in the other room playing video games. I was being told to get up, dress, and get ready. I did get dressed within minutes and looked out to see 2 police cars on the street. There were no sirens or no lights. The doorbell rang, and there were 2 uniformed officers at the door telling me my husband had been killed in an automobile accident. I've always wondered what it was that woke me up. The shaking on my shoulder was very real. The sensation of something telling me to get up and get dressed was there too, but not vocalized. As sad as it was just the beginning of a whole set of circumstances of everybody I needed being there when I needed them. In 1962, when I was a young girl and still living at home, I experienced a very odd occurrence. We lived in a very old house, and this house was wired for only one telephone, which hung on the wall in the kitchen. This was a year that my maternal grandfather had several strokes and required a lot of care. Since my grandmother never learned to drive, my mother would drive to their home and take my grandmother shopping or help care for Grandpa. One Saturday morning, she went grocery shopping before she drove to their home. It was a rainy day, so I left to take care of my 2 younger sisters and brother while she was gone. One sister and my brother were playing upstairs. The telephone was ringing, so I went to answer it. I said hello and was stunned to listen to a conversation that was taking place between my grandmother and my younger brother. The same brother who was upstairs. No wires to hook a phone up to, you know? I remember clearly the conversation, although not word for word. I clearly heard my brother say hello. Then my grandmother was asking him if my mother could come to the phone. He told her that she was shopping, but Eileen, myself, was home. My grandmother asked my brother to call me to the telephone, and I could hear him calling, "Eileen, telephone." I was shocked. I hung up the phone. I went upstairs and told my brother, who was only 9 years old at the time, what just happened. I'm sure he thought that I was crazy, but I can't remember what he said. Then I went back downstairs and called my grandmother, and this is what she said. "I called over there and Larry was supposed to bring you the telephone, but he hung up on me." I tried to tell her what I just experienced, but she did not understand what I was saying. But then, believe it or not, I didn't understand what I was saying either. Often I wonder what would have happened had I not been so spooked and stayed on the line rather than just hung up. Would I have heard myself as well? Keep in mind this was back in 1962, very rural area. Extension phones were a rarity and we couldn't redial 1 for the long distance, and everything went through an operator back then. This happened to me about half a year ago. To this day I can't understand what happened and it still freaks me out. If anybody else has experienced this or anything like it, please let me know. It was around 10 p.m. and I was lying down to go to bed. Ever since a year ago I had a really hard time sleeping, but this time I wasn't sleep deprived at all. I had a good night's rest the night before, so it's not like I had delusions from being sleep deprived. I lied down to go to sleep and I was laying on my side with my right ear against my pillow and my eyes were closed. Within maybe just 30 seconds of me closing my eyes, I heard an unfamiliar female voice whisper in my right ear, and it said, "Can you hear me?" My eyes shot open and I froze in fear. I was fully awake this whole time, and my right ear was against my pillow, yet I heard the voice as if whoever said it was an inch from my ear. I didn't know what to think about what had just happened, and I still don't know what to think about it. I ended up staying up for a while before going back to sleep, convincing myself that it was nothing. I still wonder if it would have kept me talking had I said yes, but at the time, I was too afraid to say anything back at all. This is so totally weird and random. I have a weighted blanket that is only big enough for one person. Both me and my fiancé had been wanting to use it lately, so I was looking at weighted blankets at Target last night. I remember being like, we can look somewhere else. I just wish we had one which was big enough to cover the both of us. Then last night my fiancé had the weighted blanket on her. I grabbed the edge of it and somehow it just kept going and going until it fully covered both of us, and more. It was huge. We were both like, how is this thing suddenly so huge? Then one of our cats started losing its mind as she was attacking the blanket for some reason. And then in the middle of the night I wake up because my partner is moving around and the blanket is on me, and believe it or not, it's back to normal size. We both remember this like, wait a minute, it wasn't a dream. It was bigger than this. Additionally, a few months ago, I randomly noticed some brand new Nordic ware baking sheets and muffin pans where that stuff was stored in our house. I mentioned that brand because we're too cheap to buy that. I figured that maybe my partner had bought it. I meant to ask her, but I forgot, and a few days later she goes, "Where do these new pans come from?" And I was like, "I thought you were the one who bought them." And she asked me the same thing, and I was like, "No, I haven't bought any new items for the kitchen. And even if I did, I wouldn't buy Nordic ware." So we were just like, okay, these things just pop out of nowhere. I don't know if it's related or not to our previous experience, but I thought I'd mention it. I remember this black house in my town on a street I traveled a lot on. It was black with purple trim and the architectural style was completely different than any other house in my area. I loved it and told multiple people that I wanted to buy it one day. When I was house hunting, I remember going by it with my boyfriend so I could get the address and look it up on Zillow and everything. Some time had passed and I bought a house that I was really happy with. But when I started dating somebody from a new town who wasn't from my city, I wanted to show him around my town. I showed him a bunch of these places that were important to me from childhood, etc. And then we were going down that street and I told him I was going to show him this really cool house. But the house wasn't there. A completely different house was in its place instead. I suppose it could have been torn down and rebuilt, but that house that was there didn't look like it was new either. It was an old house in a neighborhood surrounded by older houses. We drove up and down the street a couple of times because I thought maybe I just had a bad memory and remembered things differently, but apparently not. I asked other people that I know if they remembered it, but nobody can remember a house that looks like that in my town. And it was a very well-traveled street, so a lot of people would have seen it. I even posted in a Facebook group for my town about it, and nobody could remember it. I wondered if I was just dreaming or something. I've now come to think of it in my own head as the Mandela house because it reminds me of the Mandela effect. I know that might not be accurate, but the Mandela effect generally affects a lot of people, even if they experience things that aren't very well known, or that nobody knows about.